All right, good to see each of you. A little sad this morning. Nobody's gotten me an Apple gift card this morning. I'm just kidding. Did want to make quick mention. If you get a message from me ever, I will put something in there that says that it's me. Okay. So we had somebody get a hold of one of our membership lists this week, and so many of you got text messages. I started trying to count between me and Jan how many calls we fielded Thursday. I said maybe this guy was working for God because I got to talk to some people I had not talked to in a while, and so it was a good day. It wasn't what I'd planned on doing all day, is tell people I wasn't looking for Apple gift cards, but it was good to talk to several of you. If you'll never hear me ask in an urgent sense something like that, and so if you see something like that, just know that it's most likely somebody spamming. I'll never sign anything Minister Daniel or Pastor Daniel or anything like that. I'm just Daniel, okay? And so just so you know, and thank you all for calling and checking. And so many of you did, and appreciate that. And I know some of you probably just deleted it immediately, and thankful for that as well. We are between series, and in that I try to do some kind of what I would just call one-off sermons, at least one between each series. This lesson was supposed to be a one-part sermon, and this week when I started, I realized it's going to be at least two parts, okay? So we will start it today, and 2 weeks from today, we will finish it up. Next week, Paul's going to be speaking to you. I try to, especially after a long series and stuff, try to work in a week to have you hear somebody's voice other than mine. And so next week, that'll be the case, and we are excited about that. And then we'll finish this one up in 2 weeks. I want to impress some things on you today to, I hope, be a burden lifter for some of you. It may be an awareness thing for some of you. Before we start into this, I want you to recognize that the Bible is not certain things. If you are in our Sunday morning class right now, we are in Genesis 1. We've been in Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2 for about 6 weeks now. And we've still got a few more weeks to go before we get to verse 3. At least a few more weeks, because there's so much there, and we're pulling from other parts of the Bible as well. And one of the things we're learning in that class is the Bible is not designed to be a modern science book. There may be some times where science happens in the Bible, and sometimes maybe even gets things right, so to speak. But it was going to a certain culture, a certain day, a certain time, right? And while I believe God is wise, and I believe that the God of Israel is the creator of all, and that he knows all science, I don't think that he was writing a science book thousands of years ago to people who did not understand modern science. Piggybacking off of that, I want you to know that the Bible is not inherently a book about mental health. You need to know that the Bible will help with your mental health, okay? We should never divorce the two. The Bible will always be an aid to you. I just simply tell people, I say, sometimes you need the Bible and a therapist, right? Sometimes you need the Bible and somebody that God can work through to help you through some things and work through some things. We're not meant to go through this all alone, right? And the church is frequently a great source of strength and help, and there's people that can reach out, but even within the church, I would just argue there's some people who have some specialties that are going to help in certain situations more than others. If I pass out on this stage right here today, I won't. I love you, Michael. But Michael, you stay there, okay? There's a doctor right back there. All right, y'all clear the way. Right, Dr. Dodd's on the way. You understand. There's certain people who have certain specialties. I don't consider myself an expert in mental health, but I've been able to be educated and in parts of this for quite a long time. And most of you know that last year I finished my master's in social work, and at some point we'll begin working towards clinical licensure, and in order to be able to do therapy and to help people through mental health stuff. Through my internship last year, I got to see a lot of stuff. You see a lot of stuff when you get to work community mental health. I've both worked at DHR in the past, and I've worked in community mental health. And there are two places that if you can work for 2 weeks, it will change your life forever, okay? Some of you who have worked in public medical facilities and things understand this, that there is a quick light bulb moment that happens that says, this world is not all that I thought it was, right? There's some stuff out there, and some of this is complicated, and it's hard, and it's difficult, and I thought I had all the answers when I didn't know anything, right? But now I've seen some stuff, and I realize I don't have near as many answers. You know, the more you know, the less you know, right? And so I want to be clear that the Bible is not a mental health book, though. It's not its design and purpose. It's ultimately is a mental health book if you want to get to the place where mental health issues don't exist anymore, into the new heavens and new earth when God makes it all right. But it's not designed as a clinical guide, but sometimes we just see that God knows people really well. And specifically in the story we're going to start diving into today, I see a God who knows what people need to know in crisis situations. And he does some things that we still to this day clinically do in order to help in mental health situations when there's mental health breakdowns. I want to impress on you this key thing. I'm about to show you a clip by John MacArthur. Many of you may know who John MacArthur is. John MacArthur wrote a lot of books. You may have read some of them. I've taught from them. I think he's a expositor of the Bible. He does some really good stuff. He is somebody that I respect in certain places and areas a whole lot. But he made some comments recently about some mental health prognoses and things that I fundamentally take issue with. And you need to know that this stuff circulates, and it may be, you may listen to this and say, I agree with all of that, and I may or may not be able to change your mind, right? But what I do want you to know when we watch this video is that you need to know that mental health stuff is real. Now, has anybody ever faked a mental health issue before? Absolutely, right? In the same way that people have faked health issues before, right? Because they saw some avenue to get something or gain something from it. And we recognize that. And no doctor is going to say, because this person faked cancer is no longer real, right? And so I recognize that there's people who can take advantage of these situations. But I want you to know this teaching is out there. And then I'm going to systematically show you a little bit of how God is going to deal with some of this thinking. And I hope it will help you recognize the reality of mental health issues. If you have never had a mental health issue, I want you to leave here today. I want you to go home. I want you to get down on your knees, and I want you to thank your God. Okay? But I also want you to know that you are not everybody. And your experience is not the same as everyone else's. And so with that in mind, I'm going to play the MacArthur clip. This kind of got popular recently and spread around. And then we're going to jump into Elijah, and we're going to see some stuff that God has to deal with here.
Such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies. To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. we're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. There's no such thing as
all the things I disagree with about that clip. There may be a few things in there that I could agree with on some level. I do want to make you aware, though, and I think it's important to know this, that we can do brain scans on people now and prove a lot of these things. We can detect through those scans whether or not a certain person is dealing with some of these illnesses and things that he has done. And I want Christians everywhere to know this. There is no shame in taking medication for a mental health illness, and any more than there is shame for taking medication for a regular health issue. Can those drugs be abused? Absolutely, just as all drugs can be. Can we exaggerate problems? Can we do all those things? We absolutely can. Do we need to learn how to navigate grief? Do our kids need to learn how to make appropriate choices? Amen to that. We need that for our kids. But there are legitimate mental health issues that some children and adults have that complicate how they make the decision-making process, okay? And we're not all born with the same mind, same circumstances, right? Some people are born at home plate and some people are born at third base, right? And that is true of so many things. Economically it's true, socially it's true, financially it is economically, but also in regards to health and wellness. And so I want you to hear that teaching is out there. This is kind of this thing that makes you feel guilty, and you came here today and you took, as I did, by the way, a pill this morning to help me pay attention and be able to help with things. If you did that, I want you to know that you're in a safe place and that is perfectly okay. And if you are battling cancer and you took a pill this morning, I'm glad you took your pill as well, right? However, I think the Bible does inform some things and shows us, I think, through this powerful story of Elijah, that God recognizes that there are times that people are just misbehaving, and there's some times that people are going through some real stuff that they don't know how to handle. And I think Elijah becomes a great picture because we're going to see how God handles Elijah as he goes through some real stuff. All right. In order to tell you all of that, we have to do a quick run through about the story of Elijah. And it's not quick in the sense of how much text it takes up. I encourage you to go read it. You're going to get the very condensed version of this. I'm going to try to do it in just 7 or 8 minutes. All right. So let's go quickly through the story of Elijah. I want to read and set the groundwork with the first 5 or 6 verses, and then we'll turn into summaries for the rest, and then we'll come back to some text for the end. Now Elijah the Tishbite, all right, these are all Israelite people, all right, in a time where the Israelites are, as many times, they're not, they wanted a king other than God, and they've got their kings, and things are not turning out all that well. Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, all right, Ahab is the king. He says, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. The people are not acting right. They're making deliberately bad choices. And there's about to be a withdrawal of my goodness because you have chosen to go your own way. And I'm going to show you, as God does, what it looks like for people to go their own way. And it's not going to be very pretty. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah And it says, depart from here and turn east and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. And he says, you shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. God says he sends word to the king through Elijah that there's a storm brewing, right? And he says, now Elijah, here's your storm shelter, go there. And I'm going to take care of you while you're there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and he lived by the brook Cherith, that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So God is protecting, as he frequently does, one of his servants in a time of great famine and there's drought. And God says, you go here and I'm going to take care of you. And he faithfully goes there and God takes care of him. God is beginning to show Elijah this. God is beginning to show Elijah that God can be trusted. You can trust in your God. God will be faithful in those moments. But fast forward a little bit, no, we're not going there yet, but you're going to find out that even though God can be trusted and is always trustworthy, it doesn't alleviate us from the pressures of life sometimes overwhelming us. It's not always true, the fact that you lose sight of the prize for a brief moment, that you're doing that just because you don't trust God. It's not always a lack of faith. And I think in Elijah, we're going to see that to be the case. Verses 7 through 16, okay? That brook that God sent him to care for him eventually dries up, okay? Time's up, and Elijah has to move. So he sends Elijah to this area, and he said there's going to be a widow there, and she's going to take care of you. The widow is literally at that moment at the point of her last meal, and she says, me and my son are about to enjoy this, and this is probably going to be the last meal that we have, and then we're going to die. They're literally to the point of death. That's not necessarily a mental health issue. They're literally at the point that they're physically going to die because they know they don't have the sustenance needed to live any longer. And Elijah asks her for some food, and she actually gives Elijah this last meal of hers in a desperate attempt. I don't know what persuaded her, other than I know that God had come to this lady, and so at this point I think she'll probably try anything. She has just a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. But miraculously, God allows that flour and that oil to last them for a long time, up until the point that the drought ended. They were living and having food, and they were being able to sustain themselves. God here is showing Elijah that even in hopeless, and not just Elijah, but this lady that he lives with, and there's hopeless conditions, the point where there's no more food left. He walks up to this lady. God sent him there, and she's on her last little bit of food. Even to Elijah's eyes in that moment, well, you're not going to live very long on that, right? But God says, I can sustain you even sometimes when the situations look hopeless. And Elijah stays there, and God blesses him and blesses him some more. But we see in the next few verses that this widow's son, despite the fact that he's now been saved from this malnourishment, becomes very sick, and he dies. And she turns to Elijah and has the thought that you would have. God sent you here as an emissary, as a ambassador, right? You come into my house and we get food and we think things are going to be all right just to watch my child still die. She's got some serious questions, the same questions you would have in those moments. Elijah prays to God, and he stretches his body over this child 3 times, and God answers the prayer and brings the boy back to life. Y'all, I don't know what that feels like, right? I just can imagine the jubilation in the room when this boy that was dead starts breathing again. I don't know if he was immediately healed and whatever illness he had was totally gone. I don't know how miraculous it was. I just know that he was dead, and Elijah called on God, and now he's alive again. He brings life from death. That's what God does. And so what's Elijah done here? God's shown Elijah that he not only can provide for you, but Elijah, now you have the power of life and death in your hands. You know, I don't know what it's like to feel invincible, but if God started using me to bring people back to life, I think I could get there pretty quick. right? And I think Elijah is getting there. God is building him up for a task, and he's showing himself faithful. And he says, not only am I going to bless you, Elijah, I'm going to give you the power of life and death, right? Next chapter. God then tells Elijah to go tell Ahab he's going to end this drought. The drought is about to end. So along the path, Elijah meets this guy named Obadiah, who works for the king. And Obadiah is secretly a servant of God. Now, while he is in a position of service to the king, he's using his position to do some good things for God. He had been hiding away some of the prophets that Ahab, which we haven't mentioned this yet, Ahab's a really bad king, a bad dude, and his wife is even worse. His wife is so bad that to this day, if I called you her name, you know it's an insult. His wife is named Jezebel. And Ahab and Jezebel are up to no good. And God meets Obadiah, and they meet along, and this is the Obadiah who has met here, right, and he's hidden away these prophets of God. Many of them had been slain, but many of them had been spared through the hands of Obadiah. So he, because of his position, was able to hide some people in the process. So Elijah tells Obadiah to tell Ahab he is coming. And Obadiah says, hold up, wait a minute, right? I've done some big things, but if I go tell Ahab that you are coming and you don't come, he is having my head for dinner tonight. And Elijah says, listen, I promise you I'm going to come. I'm going to be faithful in this. He ensures you're going to be safe in this, right? So Elijah goes then and talks to Ahab. And Elijah challenges Ahab, right? Ahab is, by the way, the king of Israel. This is 800, 900 BC, okay? He's the king of Israel. He's supposed to be serving God, but the gods of Baal have totally infiltrated God's people. They're worshiping other gods at this point. And so Elijah challenges Ahab and says, listen, you bring your Baal gods, let's go up to the mountain and let's have a contest, and whoever wins, we'll know that's the real one true God. So God takes Elijah into this very dangerous situation. The king could have looked at Ahab and said, enough of that, off with your head. That's what could have happened in that moment. But because Ahab was a man and had an ego, he said, I'll show you, right? And so God led Elijah into this dangerous situation. And Elijah, you notice what's happened with Elijah so far? It's really interesting, isn't it? God said, go, and what did Elijah do? He just went, and he did it. There's no hesitation. God's got my back. He's feeling it, right? You ever go through life, and at that moment you feel, all right, God's got my back. I can handle the world. You had moments like that? Elijah is there, and he's got a lot of evidence at this point that God is both real, he is in control, he has the power of life and death, he has the power to work things out, even when it doesn't look like it. He should know all this, right? So Elijah then does. He goes up and he challenges these prophets of Baal to this big contest on Mount Carmel. If you want to read all this, read verses 17, 18 of 1 Kings. And there's this big contest up on Mount Carmel, and the prophets of God, the prophets of the god of Baal, they go through all kinds of work to try to get Baal just to show up. They're just like, do something, right? But Elijah says, not only am I going to do it, we're going to burn up this sacrifice, but before we do it, I want you to put a whole lot of water on it. And before that, I want you to put a whole lot more water on it. I don't want anybody to think there's any kind of trick happening here, right? There's not a little spark I'm going to hide. I want a soaking wet sacrifice. And God consumes that sacrifice that is soaked in water. And you know what all the people around do? The people who've just went through famine, who've just went through drought, and they've just watched a bunch of prophets try to call on Baal, and Baal's nowhere to be found. And you see Elijah come along, and all of a sudden they see this consuming fire. They do something that is very natural. I've been following these gods, and it didn't end very well. I'm going to follow that God over there, right? That God seems to have the power. And so Elijah orders the execution of all these prophets, and they're all killed. He prays for rain, the drought ends, and all of a sudden it seems like everything is good. God uses him to defeat these prophets who are spreading this false religion among the people. I mean, this is huge, right? He's got to feel on top of the world. Elijah has now God has proven to Elijah, you have the power of my kingdom at your hands. Not just the kingdom of the earth, but the kingdom of heaven as well. Like, you call down fire from heaven, and fire comes from heaven, right? And here's why we go through that story, is because I want you to try to put yourself in Elijah's shoes in this moment. You know, I don't know a better word other than Elijah should feel like a superhero at this point, right? Like, he literally could have, this could be a Marvel comic today, right? Whoa, and he would not be one of the little sub-characters, right? He's a headliner, right? He's done it all, and God is using him in powerful ways. He knows that it's only through the power of God. He knows that, right? He's calling on God to do things he knows, but boy, howdy, right? Like, that's got to feel good inside to know that you have an on-demand God to handle your issues, right? That will solve all your issues. I still today, by the way, I think you have an on-demand God who will solve their issues. He just doesn't always solve them the way we think he should solve them. And sometimes he doesn't solve them the time that we should solve them. But that's just an aside. I'm not telling you your God's any different. I think your God's the same God, but Elijah's been able to see it in a really clear way. What does Elijah do next? Well, let's look. Ahab goes back and tells his wife everything Elijah had done. A little backwards here, right? In a world that was very driven by men, Ahab goes back and reports to his wife, which makes me think that maybe Ahab was probably a little scared of his wife too, right? He's reporting to her in this moment. And he tells her everything Elijah has done. Now, remember everything he's been through, right? Brought people back to life, called down fire from heaven, you know, like one little piece of bread sustains us for months at a time. You know, like, whoa, God's done this. So he says how Elijah has done this and killed all these prophets with the sword. And so Jezebel says, enough with you, dear husband. You have been doing this job and you have done it very poorly. Now it's time for me to take over the job, right? And sends a messenger to Elijah and says, may the gods deal with me ever so severely. I'm putting my hands into the gods that if by this time tomorrow, I don't make your life like that of one of them. What does she say? She says, I'm about to bring the power of the whole government down on your head. There will be no place to hide. That's what the threat is, right? I don't know about you, and I know we're living in a very different world, right? But if I got a message from the president today that said, you be warned, the whole government is coming down on your head today, I'm going to say my prayers. I'm going to tell my family goodbye. You know, there ain't much I can do, right? But he had proof that wasn't true. God had just proven much more powerful than the state, right? If I don't see you by tomorrow, I'm going to take your head. And so Elijah, what should Elijah say here? I follow the God of Israel, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God that just burned this sacrifice up, the same God that brought people back to life, the same God that just chased down and killed all those prophets. God can handle that. He handled you too, Jezebel. That's what he should have said. And like us today, we're in a comfortable audience. Nobody's under any pressure. We're all sitting here chill. Like, oh, duh, Elijah, you see this, right? That's not what Elijah does at all. He does quite the very opposite. Let's see what he does. Elijah was afraid, and he starts running for his life. There's no reason for Elijah to start running for his life here, but he does. He doesn't even know where he's running. God hasn't told him to run anywhere. Every other time we see Elijah move, it's where God told him to, and he, for the first time, is going to run where he wants to, and he doesn't know where he's going. He's just running. And he runs to Beersheba in Judah, and he left his servant there. Like, I don't know if this is a trust issue with the servant. I don't know what's happening, right? I don't know why he left his servant behind, but he left his servant behind and said, you stay here, I'm going to go myself. That either there's a trust issue, possible, or maybe he's trying to protect his servant because he thinks his days are numbered. I don't know what happened. I just know he leaves the servant behind. And he goes further into the wilderness. And he comes to a little broom bush, a little structure, right? He sits down under it. And this is what he prays. He prays that he would die. He says, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. He says, I'm no better than my ancestors. He is, hear me clearly, okay? You need to hear this because you can hear it in schools and stuff, and I don't use this term. He is suicidal in this moment. He is ready to die, right? Something in him hasn't followed through with it, but he's at that point, right? And he lays down under the bush, and he goes to sleep, all right? So I want to talk a little bit about what happened right there, okay? What we're going to see next week especially as we see how God continues to deal with this. We're not going to go through it all this week, how God's answer we're going to kind of hit next week. God does not look at Elijah and say, oh, you of little faith, how dare you? Because something obviously different than the normal has happened to Elijah. Now, does Elijah lack faith on some level? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what's happened here. All I know is that I have seen this reaction before, and I've dealt with this reaction before, right? Andrew works in psychiatric health. I pick on him sometimes for that. Not pick on him, but use him in sermon illustrations. But if you work in that field, you know what it's like to see somebody who loses sight of what reality is and what they have, right? Some of you have seen this as well. There comes a point in time in which your mind just simply can't quite take much anymore, and you flip your lid, right? You know that statement, right? Flip your lid, right? That means, like, I'm through with logic, I'm through with thinking through this. You're about to get a piece of everything right now, right? You've been in a place where you've seen people flip their lid and felt helpless and did not know what to do, right? Most likely, if you hadn't seen that yet, praise God for it. Go home, get on your knees, praise God for it this afternoon, okay? But some of you have seen it. There's actually a psychologist by the, I didn't write his name. It's Daniel, it's down here in the little, isn't it? Daniel Siegels. I forget. I knew I'd forget. I know his name, but I knew I'd forget on stage. Who actually talked a little bit about what your brain actually does when you flip your lid. And I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about that for a minute. I want to talk to you about what happens here. He uses a hand model of the brain. Everybody have a hand? I think everybody does, or I wouldn't ask that question. All right. Can you hold your hand up? Can you show me your hand? All right. He takes your hand. All right. He takes your thumb. Right. Put it into the middle of your hand, and then put your fingers over the top of it. Okay. This is a really crude look of what your brain kind of looks like. You've got a brain stem, right? There's some inner parts of the brain, right? Down here is the hippocampus, right? Yeah, I love that word. It's not relevant to what we're talking about. I just like saying hippocampus. And I told it to Ford one time. He said, is that like where the hippos go to school? So it's the hippo school, right? And something you probably have heard the term of, the amygdala, right? Amygdala. That's like the emotion center of the brain. It's the thing that like you feel big emotions, fear, anxiety, love. It all comes from the amygdala. On top of it, though, we have these cortexes. These cortexes, if you really want a really extensive, you need to go to some of the doctors in the room. I can tell you just some brief things, right? And the really most important thing from a mental health point is what we call the prefrontal cortex, right? There's a lot of cortexes that do all kinds of certain things. This does what we call the executive functioning. It's in the front of your brain. It's the thing that helps you do things like weigh pros and cons, right? You've heard me use these analogies before. Like, I want to eat cheesecake every meal. Like, I talk about cheesecake a lot. But I also don't want to weigh 800 pounds and be on a TV show, right? So we make pro and con decisions at times. We sometimes make better decisions than other times, right? But if the brain is all working well, if the top brain and the bottom brain are working well, this part of the brain that walks into Cheesecake Factory and sees 12 cheesecakes says, you can't have all that, right? It talks to it and says, I know you love that and you want that and everything in you right now, but there's something in you got to wake up right now and say, nah, I can't do that right now. Sometimes people call this the wise leader. That's what Daniel calls it in his talk, okay? It's the thing that keeps us from doing really dumb stuff, right? It's the part when people tell you the brain has not developed yet and you really don't, like till you're like 25. It's this part that has not developed yet. The thing that keeps you from doing really stupid stuff. Now, you know some people over 25 that do stupid stuff. I'm not saying that being 25 or older, but before you're 25, you do some stupid stuff, and sometimes it's because you just don't think about it, right? You just do it, right? That's the prefrontal cortex. What happens when we get under stress is this thing in here, this amygdala, this emotion center that does the fear and the anxiety and all that stuff, it kind of starts like pumping, right? And you can actually feel it physiologically, can't you? When you start having increased stress, what happens? Your heart starts beating a little faster, doesn't it? You start sweating a little bit. You start to feel like the walls are caving in on you, for whatever reason. And what happens is, as you continue to increase more and more stress, well, it just beats faster and faster and faster. And it'll get harder and harder for you to keep your cool. This is why some people who have stress reactions to really loud environments, they really struggle. And you might say, well, I saw them. They were fine a few minutes ago. No, what happens is they did all they could to keep it under control. But then what happens? What happens is at some point, the lid comes off, right? The part of our brain that helps us make good decisions just says, through with that. Through making good decisions. That's why in this, you've probably heard this phrase, the fight, flight, freeze. Sometimes fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It's what you do in stressful conditions. Do you freeze or do you run away, right? Your prefrontal cortex keeps you from running away from every situation and circumstance in your life that's tough, right? But at some point, stress sometimes gets and we flip our lid. I want you to know that everybody in here has flipped their lid, right? Self included, right? If you have not flipped your lid, can you raise your hand so I know who I need to look directly at during the invitation song? That's good. Okay. All right. We've all flipped our lid, right? And I'm not telling you bear no responsibility for what you do when you flip your lid, all right? Well, a lot of what we do in therapy is just developing this prefrontal cortex. It's helping you learn coping skills that both keep this lid down, this helmet on your head to help you make good decisions or help you think better thoughts, to change negative thoughts to positive thoughts. Or sometimes it's trying to figure out, if you're in what we call a crisis situation, is how do we get this thing to close back down, right? And sometimes doctors will have to use medication. Sometimes they'll have to strap people down. Sometimes you can talk somebody down through time. You give them some time and some room, let them breathe, step back, give them some room, sometimes it'll kind of subside and you'll start to see that moment. I remember, I have a vivid explanation of this. I have seen it a thousand times. I've seen it a couple times. One of them involves Paul, but I think I've told that story. Have I told that story here? I think I have, right? Snickers bar. Alex, have I told that here? I've never told that here. Oh, I get to tell it here. Y'all heard a Snickers bar story before? Huh? Yes? No? Not voting? Y'all have heard it here. Okay. I think I've told it here. Y'all got to tell me. Have you heard the story? No? Okay. My first cousin, Alex, right? He is about, 7? 6, 7? 6? Something like that. We're going to see U.S. Marshals, I think, which was probably a bad decision, by the way, to go take him to that movie. But anyway, we did. Good movie. Great movie. One of my favorite movies, actually. But we're driving from our house. I think there was a shower at the church that night. Is that right? Was this your bridal shower or something? And back before men lost our gumption to say, no, I'm not going, like back then, men didn't go, right? All right. So we were going to see a movie while they did whatever they were doing back there, and it was me and Paul and my cousin Alex, who's visited here before. I would say the little curly head thing. He's bald now, but he used to be curly headed. Okay, about yay big. All right, he's the most like me person in the whole wide world, by the way. We are like almost like it's creepy at times, actually. But anyway, so Alex is a big mama's boy. He will not mind me saying that out loud, all right? He is a big mama's boy. Biggest mama's boy I've probably ever seen. Y'all know his mom's Mary, who used to attend here. So we are going, and we are about at the first or second red light by the time of Inslee. All right, we're in downtown Inslee, the strip on 20th Street of lights, right? And we have been coming from Maytown, and we're going to, I think, Wildwood, the $1.50 movie over here in Hoover. And because yeah, $1.50 movie, that's a Carrington thing. All right, and so we're like at the first red light, and Alex has already kind of decided, right, that he doesn't want to be here no more. He's done with this. And about the second red light, he starts to literally proceed to open the door, and he's going to run home from the second red light in Inslee all the way back to Minor, right? Several miles, 5, 6 years old. To this day, it's one of the most vivid things. Literally, me and Paul are physically trying to keep him in this little blue Dodge Shadow. I think that's what we were driving. I may be wrong about that, but anyway, we're in this little blue Dodge Shadow, I think, and we're trying to hold him into the car, right? Because, I mean, he's 5 or 6. And you may think handling a 5 or 6-year-old is easy. And sometimes it may be. But once the lid has flipped, right? And Alex has decided he is going back to his mom and he is done with this. The lid is off, right? And Paul looks at him, and Paul was a psychological genius back in his early days. He just didn't know it yet. He looks at Alex, who's having this total historic meltdown, okay? And he says, Alex, what's your favorite candy bar? And I'll never forget the look on Alex's face. He's like in terror, rage. He goes, he did not know what had hit him. He was in the middle of an emotional breakdown controlled by this part of the brain, and somebody asked him to use this part of the brain that is a decision maker, right? And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, in that moment, time, and place, Paul's very decision, logic-oriented question put his lid back on. And we went to the movie. We watched the whole movie. And everything worked out fine. It was amazing. But to this day, I'll never forget the day, because I didn't know what had happened, but I knew something had happened. I never forgot the story. But when I started learning this stuff, I was like, oh, that's what was happening in that moment. His lid was flipped, right? And all of a sudden, we woke this part back up. So what do we do with coping mechanisms, all the things that we do? We're working to wake this stuff back up. Start using the part of your brain that can think through things well. So he closed his lid back. I'll never forget, recently I had a situation, and I had worked really hard to bring down a crisis situation. And I was doing good. I was so proud of myself. I was the only therapist in the office that day, by the way, which is not supposed to happen, but here we were. And all of a sudden, a law enforcement officer came in the door and said one sentence, and everything I had done was undone. Lid comes right back off, you know. It can be very fragile, this lid that we have, this decision-making that we have. Well, I believe that God knows that Elijah had just flipped his lid. Elijah had proven himself to be trustworthy over and over and over again. Elijah didn't fundamentally just change that day. He just forgot to think it through, right? And I'm not saying Elijah doesn't have any guilt here, anything he has to deal with. But you know what God does not do in this particular situation and in this moment? He does not start yelling at Elijah. He does not start doing several things. Here's some things he does not do. After Elijah flips his lid, right? And I think he's in what I would call a state of depression. He's in a panic state of depression at this moment. And I want you to notice. I'm trying to get there. I'm gonna go to this one for me. There you go. When we go through this passage, I want you to know some things God does not do. He never blames Elijah. Was it Elijah's fault for not recognizing the power of God in this moment? Yeah, I mean, like, who else's fault is it, right? But he does not attack Elijah in this moment. He never says, Elijah, you just are feeling things. You need to stop all that emotional nonsense, right? You're just emotional right now. He doesn't say that to Elijah. He never looks at Elijah, as we're going to see, and say, you just need to get over it. He never yells. He never looks at Elijah and says, you're overreacting. And he doesn't look at Elijah and say, you know, Elijah, your problems, they're not real. And what I want to impress on you is we're going to go through the second portion of this as we kind of think through this flipping the lid and controlling ourselves and our emotions as Christians. One is, there are some biblical things, by the way, that can really help us control our emotional centers and help regulate our brain. Specifically meditation, prayer, singing. Some of those things can really do great for your mental health and create some balance, restore balance to your life. But there are some things that you should not do. and Christians should not do. And in this case, God does not do. And it's because, Elijah has proven himself to be a very faithful companion to God, listening to God in all things. And his lid flips. He's not thinking things through. And we're going to watch the process. It's really cool. I'm not going to ruin it all. But God says, all right, we got to feed you first. You need some nap, some real nap time right now, right? We need to get you out in the sun, get some vitamin D in you, right? We're going to go on a little walk, right? A pretty big walk, actually. We're going to go up, and then after you're in a better state of mind, I'm going to show you how I'm still in control. I'm going to replace those negative thoughts with some good positive thoughts. God just does some really cool stuff here. And it's the same stuff we do now. It's just a lot of the same stuff we do when we're dealing through crisis and trying to deal with things now. We're going to put a bookmark here. It's not a good natural end to the story, okay? But the two things I want you to know is Elijah was having a mental health breakdown, all right? And two, he has flipped his lid, and we're going to watch the process in the next lesson of how God brings him back to a state of peace and calm in the middle of this state of chaos and panic. Because we as Christians, y'all have heard me use this term, need to be people who bring the temperature of the room down, right? We need to be peacemakers. And you can't be a peacemaker until you learn how to regulate your own emotions in very emotional situations and circumstances, right? God made you emotional. He made your emotions. He made this part of your brain, and he made this part of your brain, and he made it all, right? And he knew how it would all work. And while this is not a mental health book, right? It's here, I guess. But while the Bible is not a mental health book, I really think this story of Elijah is going to show us some really good tools that we can use, and we can help others to see how God can create what I call mental wellness, being in a better mental state. Because a Christian who is mentally well and understands what's going on and is regulated is the kind of Christian that can help change the world. A Christian who is working strictly off emotions and strictly off of outburst and fear and I wants, you know what they're going to do? They're going to burn things to the ground, right? And we need to be peacemakers, not these people of destruction. And we get to choose, but we got, it's just like all things, right? You got to work on these things when the calm time, so that when the pressure comes, you know more what to do. Right? And we're going to talk through some more of those things next week. Thank you all for being here. This hasn't been a lesson that's meant to call you down an aisle, so to speak. But I do hope that what you saw in this is that you have a faithful God who's on your side and can teach you things and help guide you towards better wellness in your life and living in your life. And I want you to be a part of the kingdom of God, because you serve a God who really knows his stuff, right? He knows how to deal with situations, and he knows how to deal with you. He knows how to love you. And he loves you so much he gave his son to die for you. That is the good news of the gospel of Jesus, that he gave his son to die for you and to raise again on the third day. And he put people around you to support you when you're going through stuff. And you may be going through some stuff right now. And you might say, I don't know what I need, but I know I need help. Well, let the church surround you. Let us both surround you with prayer, but also may we surround you with our assistance and our love and an ear to hear, and may we be people who can help you in this life. And if you need to let that be known publicly, you want to be let known publicly, we'll sing a song. If not, just before you leave, pull somebody aside, pull one of our shepherds aside, just pull somebody aside. Somebody will lead you to somebody that can help. Feel free to pull me aside, and let's talk through these things, because I want to see Christians with a really good framework of mental wellness and striving to get there. And I want them to both use God and all the tools that God has provided for us. And I don't think those things have to stand at odds, and nor do I think they should. All right. Thank you so much. If you have any needs, we will sing together, and you can let it be known to the church.